Welcome, everyone. My name is Allison Portnow-Lathrop, and I'm the head of public programs at the Ackland Art Museum. Thank you for joining us for this artist conversation with Renée Stout this afternoon. I'd like to begin by introducing our two panelists this afternoon. Renée Stout grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and received her BFA from Carnegie Mellon University in 1980. In 1985, she moved to Washington, D.C., and began to explore the roots of her African-American heritage. She looks to the belief systems of African peoples and their descendants throughout the African diaspora, as well as to the world and her immediate environment, for the inspiration to create works that encourage self-examination, self-empowerment, and self-healing. The lives of Stout's imaginary characters unfold in a variety of media, including painting, mixed media sculpture, photography, and installation. The recipient of awards from the Joan Mitchell Foundation, the Paulette Krasner Foundation, and the Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation, Stout has shown her work in solo and group shows throughout the United States and in England, Russia, and the Netherlands. She has works in the permanent collections of the National Gallery of Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, the San Francisco Museum of Fine Art, the Dallas Museum of Fine Art, and of course, we're very proud to say, the Ackland Art Museum. Speaking with Renée today, we have Lauren Turner, the Ackland's assistant curator for the collection. Lauren helps oversee our permanent collection of over 19,000 works, in addition to working on our special exhibitions and contemporary site-specific installations in our art and gallery and on our front terrace. Lauren offers curatorial collaboration on our Close Looks digital initiative, where the latest object to be featured is Renée Stout's 1996 work in the Ackland's permanent collection, Ogun, which we'll be discussing today. So at this point, I'd like to hand things off to Lauren to begin our conversation with Renée and remind you all to join in by sharing thoughts and questions in the chat and Q&A boxes. So welcome everyone, and Lauren, take it away.
Thank you, Allison.
Yeah, thank you, Allison, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We love that you're willing to pass the Friday afternoon with us, and I'm so excited that we have Renée here to talk with us, because this is actually sort of a first in my 12 years at the Ackland, and that generally whenever I'm speaking with an artist, it's because we're newly exhibiting a work by them or they've newly created a work, but this is one where her sculpture Ogun is an old friend at the Ackland, which many of you have seen through the years. I actually just added up how long it's been on view from all of the various exhibitions, and it's 6 solid years, which is really impressive.
Wow.
But that's not just one chunk of 6 solid years. That's coming up, coming down, coming up, coming down. So it's been used quite a bit. And I wanted to introduce really quickly that aside from this work, which is the focus of our latest Close Looks feature, a feature where we're asking everyone to take some time to think about what do they see in a work, what they think in a work, and show them some other resources for finding out more. We have 2 other works by Renée in the collection, and I think, Allison, if you could bring up those really quickly. I'm going to a certain extent, lean on Renée with this, because this all was before my time at the Ackland. I've always known Ogun as a well-established part of the collection, so I was not here when it came in as an acquisition, but this is the work that we'll be talking about most today. But then next slide, we also have, from even before this work, our relationship with Renée, as I understand it, extends back to 1996, when we were one of the galleries to host her project, Dear Robert, I'll See You at the Crossroads, which I hope we'll talk a little bit more about. But first, let's go on to the next slide. That's Ogun again. And House Guest from Hell is our other mixed media installation by Renée that it comes out less frequently, not because we don't love it, but just because it has more paper elements that make us have to limit its exposure a bit more. Similar reasons for the next series of slides, which is the 7 Windows portfolio that we have by Renée, that I believe is featuring her alter ego, Madame Ching. And we'll but I may be wrong on that. So we'll get more into questions of alter egos, because I know there have been a few in your career as we move on through the conversation. And Allison, if you could just flip through the next few slides. That is a portfolio of 9 archival pigment prints. Next slide. That are presented like journal entries. And I just spent some time with them today, and it was so much fun. But what I am asking, because I have just had a solid block of talking, and I know we're all here to hear from Renee, is if she would be willing to sort of introduce Ogun as a sculpture and some of what she was thinking, and perhaps even having some thoughts now with the benefit of hindsight, knowing that so much of her career has passed, sort of what things you may even are newly remembering about it, any sort of thing. I'm just inviting you to share, and then we'll talk some and we'll open it up to questions from the audience.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting that you all decided to have me do this talk at this time about that piece, Ogun, because looking at the times that we're in currently and all that's going on with Black Lives Matter and all the civil and political unrest that we've been through in the past few years, and culminating in this weird 2020 that doesn't even seem to be letting up. It's strange because it's almost as if something traumatic is like, in looking at the piece, in an interesting kind of way, it's bringing up feelings that I had back when I created it. Back when I created Ogun, I lived on a street in Washington, D.C., where it was there was a crack epidemic in D.C. back in the 80s, 90s, but at the sort of the tail end, there was a lot of stuff going on the street that I lived on. Some of the young boys that hung out on the street were killed that I knew and would speak to every day. And so when I created that piece, it was about channeling my frustration about the situation and calling on ancestors to sort of guide, the young boys, and just putting out a kind of energy that I felt was helping me process, what we were seeing every day on DC streets and that kind of thing. But when I look at that piece now, it saddens me because, in a sense, you would hope that with nearly 30 years going by since I made that piece, I mean, I'm 63 now, and I was 36 when I made that piece. And all these years later, we are still facing the same issues. That's the frustrating thing. It's like, why are we living in a culture that doesn't learn from, its mistakes and fix the issues that make this piece still relevant today? It should not be relevant. I was hoping, when I made this piece, one day you look back nostalgically on, wow, there were some bad times. This is how I processed it, but we've moved on from that. And sadly, that isn't the case.
Yeah, that was a gut punch I had when I was sort of reading some of the thoughts we had in the file from you back in 1997 and comparing it to our current moment. And I'm like, you would think that by virtue of years passing, it would not be so contemporary, but I think you've absolutely hit on something that has made it even more relevant today.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, my work goes in and out of dealing with political issues. Like sometimes they're very overt, the way I deal with it, like as in this piece right here. And then when you go to the 7 Windows piece, that's more of a personal thing. So my work goes in and out, and the House Guest from Hell is in, it's like more personal. But then what I noticed is when things get intense, in socially and, in everyday life, my work has a tendency to shift into this kind of work here, where it's helped me to process what's going on. So all the sculpture that came out of this period, 1995, 96, 97, 98, was very political, overtly political. And then, I went through a period in the early 2000s where it became more personal. And then it started to build up again until we are where we are now. My current work is very, once again, more political.
For those of us on this webinar who have not been able to see Ogun in person, we have, we'll have Allison moving back and forth amongst some slides of various views of it, but I think it's a great example of your mastery of mixed media and assemblage. A lot of times on our object labels, I hate it when we use the phrase another media because it feels like a cop-out, but we realized when inventorying yours, the label would take like multiple pages to list everything that's in it. I believe when we launched the Close Looks page, the description of what our director of education interpretation was seeing went on for 2,200 words. There's a lot happening in here. And I was wondering if you could sort of, using Ogun as a starting point, talk about like how this is reflective of a career that to me seems has been very mixed media oriented throughout the decades.
Yeah, I was trained as a painter. When I went to Carnegie Mellon, I majored in painting. But I think the seeds of this Ogun piece can be found in, being a child around 10 years old. My fourth grade art teacher suggested to my parents that, they let me enroll in a Saturday art class at the Carnegie Museum that was for children that were gifted in, drawing and that kind of thing in the Pittsburgh public school area, right? So at these Saturday art classes, there were hundreds of kids that were coming from schools all around the city to take a drawing course at the museum that was instructed by a retired man. He was once a Pittsburgh public school teacher himself, named Joseph Fitzpatrick, who was a painter. And during that time, they would have us draw from displays in the natural history part of the museum, like like animals and things like that, in the ethnographic section of the museum. And I came across an African figure, a power figure called an Nkisi Nkondi. And for those of you who are familiar with those kinds of things, even if you're not, if I describe it, you're kind of going to get an idea because I'm sure people have seen them before, but it's a carved wooden figure, usually with nails driven in. And then sometimes there's like a little stomach area that has glass over it in a mirror. There's a little compartment, a secret compartment that's filled with stuff that the viewer doesn't see. Well, I encountered one of those at 10 years old. And to me, that was my first contact with a mixed media object. There were nails, there was wood, there was rope, there were shells, there were, and I didn't know what it was because back then in the Carnegie Museum, they didn't have extensive information next to that piece. All they had was fetish, Congo. That's all there was. It wasn't until, I moved down to Washington, D.C. and encountered the National Museum of African Art that I saw, an extensive display of these objects with, wealth of information by them. And I began to sort of, understand what the purpose was and, the spiritual reasons behind it, ceremonial reasons behind these objects. But when I look at this Ogun, I could really see back then that very first Nkisi Nkondi that I encountered. And, this is influenced by that.
Thank you. One of the things I was wondering is, I know that there's a professor at the university here who with his classes has been talking a lot about this idea of found objects and trying to sort of reposition how we discuss those so it doesn't just seem like an indiscriminate collecting of objects.
Right.
So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, we can see in here that there's chicken leg, there's baby doll head, there's little tiny tools, there's tintypes. Would you say that when you're dealing with your practice that these objects have a certain degree of significance to you? Do some have more than others? Basically, what is sort of your process for culling through and gathering and even tracking all of these found materials that you're using within your works?
Well, I think that after seeing the Nkisi Nkondi, that was in the back of my mind. But then around 1984, I discovered both the work of Betty Saar and Joseph Cornell, and then thought it was very interesting, after reading a catalog of Betty's, that she had seen Joseph Cornell's work, and that was a big influence on her. So I think with that in mind, I started wanting to leave the constraints of painting. Painting for me at that time felt very, very limiting. I felt that there were ideas and issues that I wanted to express that painting wouldn't allow me to do. And so I decided that I wanted to start making, three-dimensional objects. And that idea of found objects was exciting because, when something has been used for one purpose and then you find it and you can just, use that to create something and repurpose it in a different kind of way. Eventually, I began to develop my own personal sort of language in my work. And, I didn't want to just use indiscriminate, just objects, just, oh yeah, let me stick this here, let me stick these. By the time I got to creating this piece Ogun, there's a reason why everything there is there. It's just not randomly stuck there. I had, ideas about why I needed to put certain things in there. And so when I use found objects, they are done with a purpose. There's a meaning behind that object, and that object, may be a metaphor for something else. Like if I use like a little tiny fake bird in something, that's going to be about transcendence and the ability to rise above something,
I like that you bring up this idea of you sort of having your own language in the work, because that works on both this sort of figurative level, but also in this piece on a very literal level, because there are inscriptions around the base of the work. And amidst those inscriptions are a series of symbols. And I wondered if you could talk, you can see them some here, and I wondered if you could talk about sort of how you came about those, what you feel they're signifying. I know we don't have necessarily any particularly specific notes from the past, so I'd love to hear if you remember anything about populating them when you made it.
What's interesting is there was a show that I was in, and I was very young at the time, called Black Art Ancestral Legacy, the African Impulse in African American Art. And that show opened at the Dallas Museum around, I think it was, oh boy, it was 1989. Back around that time, I was doing a series of objects that I was doing this kind of like spirit writing or something like that. It was a personal, like little alphabet that, and I don't know why I started doing it. Maybe I was influenced by hieroglyphics. I don't know. But I started doing that. And what it was kind of a stream of conscious way of just thinking about things, but then just letting myself write without being conscious of the way I would make these symbols. And it was almost like writing out paragraphs, and as if I was trying to speak to maybe another realm, that we had this secret language going on. And at some point, I didn't do it anymore. So whatever reason I did it, the need was solved, and then, and I didn't do it anymore after that. So that's almost kind of a mystery to me too. So when I saw this, I didn't even remember I'd put that on there at all, So it's kind of interesting to see that.
I also know that, let me bring up here, we do have the inscriptions that are around the base that are in English, say, Nkisi to protect young Black males, 20th century and beyond. Ogun, why do they accept bullets easier than they accept love? And then you list Lawrence P. Stout Sr., Grandpa. It says they were steel workers, mechanics, truck drivers, hunters, warriors in a battle for survival, theirs and mine. And you list Jesse Owens Sr., Pap, and then you say spirit of Ogun. And Ogun is a divinity figure within the Yoruba culture, associated with metalwork and warriors.
Yes.
And I wondered if you wanted to talk about sort of the kinship you felt to that figure and your family history, both then and maybe if it still is prevalent for you today.
Well, I'll start off by saying that Ogun is very prevalent today, even now more than when I created this. And Ogun, one thing I like about that pantheon of Yoruba spirits in the diaspora, like Haiti and South America and other places where the seeds of these African religions still continue to flourish, his realm has broadened. Back then it was like, warrior, metalsmith, but now it has expanded to technology, and I love that these spirits grow and adapt to the times we're in. And so there's still warrior, it's still the warrior spirit there, which is what I really need right now with what's going on. It's interesting how a lot of women, when you look at that kind of pantheon, they'll gravitate towards like Oshun, who is, beauty, represents beauty, love, that kind of thing. And same with Urzali and Haiti, the spirit of love, beauty, and wealth. And there's a corner of me that is, has that kind of feminine softness and, love of beauty. But at my core, I'm very much a warrior and identify more with Ogun than those, more female spirits. And I think it's because I'm so observant about what's going on around me at all times, very sensitive to it, very perceptive. And I see a whole lot that I wish I didn't see, but I don't have the luxury of not seeing it. And I'm a critical thinker, I'm an abstract thinker. And I've always been taking bits of information and putting it together to see a bigger picture. And even before the 2016 election, I saw the country heading in a terrible direction. And I felt like I was alone in that, because when I would try to express to friends, I would say, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And they didn't know why I was saying it, and then they come to me now and they say, you were right about that. It's gotten, much worse. But I think that having this kind of Ogun energy and just thinking the way I think is what helps me to process what's going on and create works like this, that even when I look at other works that I've done in the same period that I did the Ogun, they have a kind of prophetic thing about them, that kind of sort of predicted where we would be now. And it surprises me sometimes and it doesn't sometimes,
So I definitely feel the prophetic aspect strongly, but I was actually going to take it a little bit in the reverse direction of history and ask about the tintypes, because I know any sort of choice, like that's such a, to a certain degree, time specific medium that it immediately makes you like sort of trigger into thinking, oh, we're talking about history. And I was wondering if you could talk to your inclusion of tintypes at the base of it and why you chose perhaps that photographic form over others and what your intentions were.
When I chose these tintypes, I specifically wanted to make reference to ancestors and previous generations from mine, to bring in that past, present, future. Whenever I'm creating works, I'm always thinking past, present, and with a look towards the future and the possibilities of the future. And I can't stop thinking that way. It's my works are always kind of layered in that way. And in using actual tintypes that they're not my family members, sometimes people will bring me photographs. Either they found them or they're their own family members, but they may not know who they are, so they don't really have an attachment to them. But for me, I wish I had more family photographs like this, so they become precious to me, even though they aren't family members. And in using the actual tintypes, where, I wish I could have kept them for myself, but by placing those actual tintypes in the piece, it's like I was taking energy, the actual object from that time, and imbuing the piece with that kind of energy, of those people who are in the photographs. Their likeness becomes a part of the piece. So therefore their energy becomes part of the piece. And they're who I'm having the dialogue with. And they're stand-ins for my own grandfathers and father.
Thank you. One of the things I was wondering, especially since you brought it up so near the beginning, since this piece has such relevance today, if you were trying to make an Nkisi for today, how might your choices differ from the choices you were making here in 1995?
I don't really think that my choices would have been much different, because I think in this one, I pretty much covered a lot of ground with, you say, you see there's technology pulled in there.
You did.
On the side, you have a concertina, the fragments of a concertina where, music is so much a part of my process. I love gardening. So you see that little, on the side that looks like an arm hanging down. It's like a little rake, I don't know what that thing is, but it was a rusted little rake like that almost creates a hand and an arm. I garden, so that's there. I think that I pretty much approach this in my way that I approach things. Now what might be different is I might have stumbled across some different things. If I did this piece now, there might be some different objects, but that I would have included, that kind of thing. It depends on, what I have at my disposal at that point. But I think I pretty much went into it back then with the same kind of approach and aesthetics that I would have now.
So I do want to sort of bring into giving you a chance to talk about what you've been creating since Ogun. And one of the ways I thought maybe we could start with that is, so much of your practice relates to various traditions within the African diaspora. And in this instance, we're dealing a lot with the Yoruba culture, but is there any particular tradition that's really occupying your thoughts and art making currently?
I would say that I am still pretty fascinated by the way some African belief systems have sort of stayed, with us throughout the diaspora and adapted to, new situations and, the current times and that kind of thing. So I'm fascinated with the Yoruba traditions. I'm still fascinated with the, with Congo traditions and various other religious belief systems and how they are used as systems to cope, and keep yourself grounded during times like these. Is very fascinating for me. So it's like, I don't think it's ever changed. I think it's just that I've, grown more with it and discovered more knowledge behind, some of the things I was studying before. So I would say it just keeps broadening.
So sort of tangential to that, I'm curious, because this isn't an aspect of your practice that we can necessarily know as much about in Ogun, but I know you have quite the history of sort of employing artistic alter egos within your practice. I believe,
Yeah.
I know of two. I don't know if a third one has emerged yet, but there's Madame Ching and there's Fatima Mayfield. Yeah. And I wondered if you could talk about sort of how, as an artist, you find the idea of an alter ego useful to your practice.
That one, the Madame Ching was the first alter ego who emerged when I was in my probably early to mid 30s. And I just used her as a vehicle to tell a narrative or a story. And then I added characters. And then I realized that she kind of disappeared for a tiny bit. And then in my 40s, the new one, Fatima Mayfield, emerged. And I didn't think much about it. I just had these alter egos. And then in hindsight, I realized that what I was doing with the alter egos, I'm a very introverted person, and people wouldn't know that because I have, learned how to get in front of people and talk about the work, because I'm always having to go give a talk somewhere. But I'm really a person that prefers to be like, in my little studio cocoon, whatever. And it takes a lot for me to have to talk and speak about things. So what I realized I had been doing, and looking back on it, was that I was creating a persona to project myself, as well as a vehicle to tell the narrative. So she became sort of the face that I could wear, to face the world. And also I realized that what I was projecting subconsciously. I did, I can look at it now and dissect it, but subconsciously, I was projecting the woman that I hoped I could be, a strong woman who is fearless and that kind of thing. And both of those alter egos were like that, And I think with the first alter ego, the reason why she changed into and morphed into the new one is because when I was younger, I had these preconceived ideas about what a mature woman is supposed to think and do. But then once I hit 40, I'm like, it's something else altogether, right? And so the new alter ego emerged because I wasn't quite yet ready to give myself permission to be that. And then I realized at some point, maybe as 60 approached, I'm like, there's no alter ego. It's like, I am her, right? So I think that that's what the process was, the alter egos. And I could still, tell stories through an alter ego. But what I find is that the direction that my work is going in now, I don't really need the alter ego to tell it. I think that I will save those characters for actually maybe writing a book one day or doing, little video works with characters, playing off of each other. But I think in the work that I'm doing now, I'm dealing with issues that are personal and social and all those other kinds of things. And that's me wanting to speak about these things. But I have been empowered by those alter egos. That's what gave me the courage and the permission to be who I am now.
Do you think that having, aside from your own sort of path to maturity and self-understanding, do you think that having separate alter ego, like, more than one, has allowed for different types of world building? Because it seems like that's a lot of what you're able to do with them when you're describing narrative and stories, is you're just sort of able to build a world around them that you can then introduce through your art.
Yeah, you know what I think? The alter ego, in a way, was it allowed me to step outside of myself and observe myself. And I can't explain how that operated, right? But it did. I could remove myself and observe things and look back and forth at the alter ego, look at myself. But I'm only aware of that now. I think it was a subconscious process, And then when I came to the realization that I didn't really need to work through the alter ego or anymore, that's when I think I started looking back on why I had them in the first place. And that's when it all came to me. It's like, that's how that was working. And even now, because I was doing that subconsciously and then realized consciously I was doing it, in situations now, let's say you get into a situation with somebody, and it's not a comfortable situation, and it's going to take some kind of communication, and you don't want any misunderstandings. In some weird way, I have the ability to step outside of myself in that moment and observe the way I'm interacting with that person. And it enables me to choose how I'm going to proceed with that conversation in order to create some kind of understanding.
So you've mentioned that right now you're working on art that's a lot more personal and political. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you could sort of talk us, without, giving away your secrets, through some of what you've been working on. Like, I don't want you to feel like you have to debut anything that's not ready. If you could sort of tell us some of what is occupying your thoughts now and how you've been manifesting that.
Well, right now, given this past year, the way everybody's been kind of secluded a bit, and it's not like I have a husband and children so that, I was, with a unit here. I have a good friend that lives in the apartment below my house, and we can holler down to each other and, and have our Friday pizza time and that kind of thing. But for the most part, I'm spending a whole lot of time by myself. And, the only thing I do is go to the grocery store. That's it, So I've been at home, thinking. And in that time, I've been doing a lot of observing, looking at the news like everybody else. And I've been transformed in this year, realizing that, I'm looking at the world that we live in, but specifically the culture and the country that I'm in, and where it could possibly be going after all I've witnessed. And it's very uncomfortable. So some of what, my work has always been about having a system to cope instead of, letting myself, get upset or depressed or whatever, I go put what I'm thinking or channel what I'm thinking into the work and work through it that way. So my recent work has been about projecting parallel universes that are not contaminated by this one. So there's this whole way of me realizing I may be in this, but I don't have to allow myself to be of it. I can project myself to another space and create a world, So maybe I'm not creating the alter ego. I'm just creating a whole new space that I'm going off to when I feel like it, right?
Yeah.
And me and people like me are the authorities. These authorities are not our authorities, right? And there's a whole new order there. So that's what I've been doing. And I've been creating, like I have hoodoo assassins that protect that world. I'm showing you landscapes from that world. So it's just, about projecting something different possibilities than what I'm seeing right here in the here and now.
I love hearing that, not just because it makes me feel less like I'm going crazy when I have my escapism, but actually when people are registering for this conversation, they're asked to provide potential questions for you that we could discuss. And one of the ones that I really enjoyed, let me pull it up to make sure I get it right, because I think it starts to touch on what you just mentioned, is Fatima Mayfield planning a voyage beyond planet Earth? And what does she think of Afrofuturists?
Well, I'm right there. The thing is, I was thinking this way before, and in the term Afrofuturism has existed for a while, but I didn't know about it.
Yeah.
I just knew the way I was thinking. Then all of a sudden I start seeing that term and I'm like, okay, that's the way I've been thinking. So I do feel like that my work is a part of that aesthetic or that philosophy, the idea, like even Sun Ra, space is the place, it's like, this isn't the only thing, it's funny how in terms of being on Earth, the question always is, are humans the only thing in this whole universe, right? And it's like, when you ponder that, I mean, that's a little arrogant, right? I mean, there has to be something else out there, and if there is, then how come I can't, can we eventually get there and get beyond this? Because what I'm feeling is that to get through this, I have to know that this isn't all there is. This planet here isn't all there is, so it's a process of projecting yourself outward and examining the possibilities and asking the what ifs.
Thank you. That's really interesting to hear. And I'm really latching on to your idea of like that sort of Afrofuturism existed even before the term, like that just we needed a name for it for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the questions we received, which is a powerful one, and like it's a big one to ask of you, but someone asked, what do you see as the role of museums in presenting your work to the public, and how should we do it better?
I think everybody's going through right now a process of re-examining the way we do things, in institutions and that kind of thing. And I think that this is a good example of the ways that, my work can be presented through a museum. The idea that, all these years, it was on display. And from what, I've heard that, tours would come through, people would talk about the work. But I think now the technology is allowing me to be able to really talk to the public about the work in a way that I wouldn't have been able to before. Like, for example, had you invited me down for a talk, people might have come to the museum to hear about it, but with this format right here, people across the country can hear about it at one time. And I think that gives people a better connection to the work. I mean, it's not like they can actually see it in the round, but this is better than nothing. You know what I mean? It's mm-hmm. like, we're having an in-depth discussion about why I did that piece, so that if anybody ever comes to the museum that has been listening to this talk and sees it, there's a whole other level of information that they have that, they don't even have to have a docent tell them, they heard me speak about it. So I think things like this are helping.
That's helpful to hear, definitely. And
mm-hmm.
it's good to know that they seem like they're adding to sort of the globalized presence that I think museums need to have in terms of, because I know we have a real tension between we want to respect the object and the materiality of the object, because I know that's very important to artists, but then also wanting to make sure we are reaching audiences that may not be able to actually be in our building. So that's
right.
Trying to figure out sort of that balance.
Yeah.
This was a question that I felt had more power, considering how we all need reinvigoration after this past year of the pandemic. But someone asked, just what are some things you do to reinvigorate your creativity?
Oh, skating and listening to music, and skating while listening to good music. So that is, before the pandemic, I roller skated 3 times a week. And that was my chance to get out of the studio, my home/studio, to go into an environment where people don't even know I'm an artist. I'm just one of many people enjoying the activity of skating and hearing music from like the 60s, 70s, 80s, a whole like span of music, R&B, soul, rock, whatever, right? All kinds of music. And just for that moment, feeling free as a bird on my skates. And while I'm listening, I'm coming up with ideas for art, I'm having conversations in my own head about what I want to do. But to me, that's where my office is, on the skating rink floor. That's where I come up with, a lot of ideas. But since the pandemic, since I couldn't go indoors, because this was a rink that I was going to, and I missed the social aspect of the rink. That was part of it, being with other people who are enjoying this activity. But fortunately, here in DC, we have an outdoor rink in Anacostia National Park. And it's a very nice rink down by the river. And I was able to do that until it got cold outside. And so now that it's getting warmer, I think that I want to go back and, and skate, because that was exercise, and it was that, like I said, that head time. But what I've been doing since I couldn't go skate, I'll get on the computer and look at beautiful things, or I'll read, and, go in the studio and piddle and listen to music. So it's been very quiet and introspective for these last couple of months while it's been cold.
Yeah, the cold months were some of the most challenging ones, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Another question that came up was, who are the artists and writers that you're sort of taking in these days? Like, who do you make sure to read? Who do you make sure to see? I know you've mentioned already that Betty Saar and Joseph Cornell were some influences of the past. What are some for the future or the present?
Well, what's interesting is, and this is just I'll try to tell this story very quickly, that.
Oh, we got time. You can do it.
Sean Scully, a friend of mine who was the curator at the Phillips collection several years ago, like, back in, I think 2000, it was like 2005 or something like that, did a Sean Scully show at the Phillips collection here in DC. And he had Sean Scully over to dinner at his house. And, my curator friend has a collection of art, of course. And so Sean Scully walked up to one of my pieces and said, "Who's this?" And he said, "Oh, that's my friend Renee," So, I had some realism going on there, and I had some, passages that, were pretty funky over in there. So he looks at it, he says, "It's a little bit too pop for me, but I like this area right here. She's a good painter. She could be a good abstract painter." So my friend tells me this, and I'm like, "What?" Because I'm not an abstract painter, right? But I do love abstraction. I really do. And so, okay, 10 years passed, and that curator was in New York for something and ran into Sean Scully. And Sean Scully says to him, "How's your friend?" He didn't remember my name. He's like, "But how's your friend, the painter?" And he said, "Oh, she's good." And Sean said, "I want her to have a show in my studio in New York." And I'm like, so my friend tells me this. I'm like, "What?" I mean, I almost fell off my chair, right? So, so about 2 weeks later, after that encounter, Sean had to be in DC for something. And he asked my friend to invite me to dinner with them. And he didn't waste any time. We were sitting in this restaurant. Sean pulls out his cell phone and says, "So we have to set a time for your show." So, all this is moving pretty fast, right?
Yeah.
So he gives me 6 months. I'm like, heck, I need a year, but you don't argue with that, right? It's like, I got to do paintings in 6 months. But the challenge from him was, I want you to do a body of abstract works. But then he changed his mind and said, no, you can do what you want to do, right? But then I'm like, I don't back down from a challenge, right? It's like, yeah, you're going to challenge me, okay. So I took that 6 months and stayed in my studio trying to develop the aspects of my paintings that did lean towards the abstraction. Like sometimes if you take the figurative or the realistic parts out of, there are these passages that are very abstract that I really fall in love with, right? After it's purely accidental. So the challenge was for me to take those accidental passages that I love so much in my own work and that he recognized as areas that could be abstract paintings on their own, and to try to create a body of work like that. And I think that that's what's been inspiring me. And I had the show in his studio in Chelsea. It opened in, I think it was like May or June of 2016. And ever since, I've been struggling in that in-between world between realism and abstraction. And I entitled the show Between Two Worlds. And I'm still there. And I realize that I'll probably always be between those two worlds, because what I'm doing now, I'm still doing things that are representational, but then some of the things that I deal with, the ideas that I have are abstract, but the viewer understands what I'm trying to say because the titles are very important. So even an abstract work can deal with issues because the title leads you that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at right now, being inspired by challenging myself to go between the abstraction and the realism.
Then you'll really like this other question that was submitted, because the person wrote that they're always struck by your ability to redirect our thoughts to the magic of art making, while you also have a certain magic of personal memory. And they're wondering how you approach the relationship between those two kinds of magic, personal memory and observation versus, they say, the magic of making.
The magic of making?
Yeah.
It's not a conscious thing. It's like I just move through my world thinking in terms of, art making being magical. The idea that, I hear a snatch of conversation walking down the street, and then it informs a piece that I'm going to make later. That kind of alchemy has just always been amazing to me. It just happens. I think it's the way a lot of artists think. We're just, I had a woman interview me recently, and she was like, what's inspiring you? And I said, it's really hard to say. I never know what's going to come out of where to inspire me. I'm just living life, moving through life, and absorbing things like a sponge, and it all gets in there some kind of way and comes back out in the strangest things, the ideas that I come up with. And I never have a lack of ideas. I mean, every single day, like I have the sketchbook sitting on the table in back of me. I'm always writing down ideas. Now sometimes it's hard to get motivated when you're a little down about stuff that's going on, but I never have a lack of ideas. And if I stopped even writing down another idea, it would take me a lifetime and more to get to the ones I already have full of sketchbooks with, ideas. Yeah.
So I know we have about 10 minutes left, and we've worked through a number of the really excellent questions that were submitted by folks. Thank you to everyone who chose to do that. We appreciate it. And I think it got some great story. I would have never pictured Sean Scully, Renée Stout collaboration.
Isn't that hilarious? That makes me laugh all the time, because you could pick two opposite artists, right?
Yeah. But I do want to open it up and invite Allison back in case she's been seeing any questions that have popped up in the chat that we could return to. I've been trying to keep an eye on it, but I don't know if I've caught everything.
Sure. Well, we have one question here about the kinds of works that you're making now, which we've heard a little bit about. But this person would also like to know how you would like, Renée, audiences to think about them.
to think about my works that I'm making now.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that having been challenged by Sean to do the paintings was a good sort of like crossroads or turning point for me. Like I said, I was trained as a painter, and I had kind of pushed painting away and went into, three-dimensional work. And, over the years, I gradually got back to it, but still didn't really think about painting much. But I think this challenge really made me actually love painting again, to the point where I'm doing more painting now than three-dimensional work, because I'm just painting is just like, okay, it has possibilities that I didn't even realize, that I never really pushed the boundaries of it. And now that I'm trying to do that. But I think my works are still idea and issue driven. And so it's combining the process of painting and the materiality of painting with the thoughts I have and what I'm trying to convey. And I think when viewers come to my work, I'm really trying to ask questions or make statements that make people think about, where we are in our development as humans right now, the direction that our country is headed in, because I think these are important questions to ask. I feel like we're in, times where we can't ignore what's going on. It's like, because if we keep ignoring things and not dealing with the issues head on, it's going to be like that movie Groundhog's Day, where you keep wondering why you're back in the same spot again because you didn't change anything. You know what I mean? So I think that that's what I'm hoping. And as an artist, it is important for me when I create an object to make something so aesthetically compelling that a viewer wants to move closer. And it's then that I want to ask them the question or poke them in the eye and hit them over the head with my with my statement or whatever. But I first want to draw you in. I first want to make an engaging object. So it's a balance of creating something that a viewer would want to look at, like the Ogun piece. It's like it's an interesting looking object, but then once you get in and you start to read it, that's when you kind of get an idea on some of the levels that it's working on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have actually another question that is asking more about Ogun, specifically about those objects that draw you in that are part of the piece. So someone has asked, can you explain a bit for us about the additional parts, the spherical shapes at the top, the exhaust pipe, maybe? What is it created from? What do they represent for you? What are the spherical shapes on the side of Ogun's body? Do they represent murdered or damaged souls? So we have several questions about that and about the photographs, about sort of the materiality of the piece. And I can bring it back up if we'd like to.
Okay, well, on the sides of the Ogun, there are all these like sort of sacks. And if one goes to a museum that has an African art collection, some of these pieces that I talked about in the beginning, these power figures from the Congo, they will feature the same kind of pouches on the side. And what they're filled with are herbs and organic materials that are designed or the concept is that when you include these organic materials, it's supposed to provide a certain kind of energy for change or protection. So that's what's on the side. This is functioning like one of those Nkisi figures that I encountered, in the Carnegie Museum and have since encountered in the Museum of African Art here in DC. But this was very much inspired by, the way one would think of how an Nkisi is put together to sort of bring change. And so that's what those sacks are on the side. And the spherical things, if they're referring to the back, like the back of the Ogun has part of a computer that was taken out of a computer. What is not a computer? I think it was a printer that one of my first dealers had, where he would do these iris prints or archival pigment prints. And I think that was it recorded information. Came out of the circuit board, the circuit, Look, I don't know how this technology fit together. I just get the parts, right? But that's a metaphor for recording information, and time and what has transpired. So there are a lot of objects that have metaphors to them in the piece.
in terms of the materiality of the piece, I've wondered, how did you achieve this overall breast patina effect?
That I won't tell.
Okay, that's
Trade
fair.
secret. Trade secret.
Trade secret. Yeah, you don't need to. Well, I commend you on it regardless.
Thank you.
It looks like we have another question coming in where someone has asked, when you're creating your works, is there ever a particular audience you have in mind?
You know, I don't really, yes and no. I think that first of all, when I make a piece, like I do not want to be in my, you know, as an artist who's self-employed or you know, an independent artist, I have a gallery that represents me, but I'm very careful not to gear my work towards, oh, can the gallery sell this? I don't ever want to do that, because if I do that, then that's going to hamper my creativity. I first do a work that, you know, I felt compelled to do. I had something I had to say, I want to make this piece, right? So all the rest of that stuff comes later. First, I want to create this piece. And when I'm making a piece, I'm really talking to my viewers, no matter who they are. You know, if I'm making art, I'm talking to everybody. Wherever that piece ends up, I'm talking to whoever walks in there and encounters it. So that's who I'm talking to. I just happen to be telling a story from the point of view of an African-American woman. So that means that, you know, maybe women might know, you know, my objects might resonate with women on some level. They might resonate with African-Americans in general on some level. But as a human being, I'm hoping that my objects resonate with people who want to think and want to be challenged to think. So yeah, it's everybody.
Would you say that you ever sort of see your art as activism, or like intentional activism, or just that you hope that getting people thinking may spur on change?
You know, I've just been thinking about that recently. Is what I'm doing a form of activism? And I think it is. I would have never thought of myself as that, but in a sense, this is my best way to be an activist, by, you know, saying what I need to say in the work in certain kinds of way. I'm certainly outspoken. I mean, my friends now, you know, I told you I was an introvert, and I am. You wouldn't know it by my Facebook posts. It's like, stop ranting today. Don't do any rants today, right? But but I think that I do. Here's what I think about. When I'm dead and gone, and my objects still exist after me, I want future generations to look at the work and realize or think about what may have been going on in the time that I lived and what I had to say about it. And what did that reveal? What did what I make reveal about the society we lived in? Just like all the others before us that we look at their art, and, you know, like Goya and you know, Ed Keenholz and people that, you know, that I like, Afrocobra, you know, all the artists who commented on, you know, about things that were going on. I want generations to look at mine and probably, you know, think about how I looked at the world and processed and what I had to say about it.
I mean, from what I've seen, at least of the works in our collection, that seems to be what you're doing, and doing well. So I definitely agree with that assessment.
Thank you.
I know we are reaching the end of our time, so I was going to just leave us on one last question with you, because I know, because we are a university art museum, we often have students in the audience, and I would say it's fair to say that you are an artist that has had a remarkable degree of success in her career. And I wonder if you have any advice to all of those aspiring artists who are starting out and starting to navigate the art world.
Well, one of the things that I would hope that young artists do is really dig deep into art history to see what's been done, and see, you know, what's been written about things, and how, you know, art that's been made before connected to society. Because what I worry about these days is with so much social media like Instagram and things like that, which, you know, it's a lot of information there. It's a lot of interesting information. But I noticed that students get all of their inspiration from this kind of media instead of really digging deep and, you know, reading about art history and that kind of thing. And so what starts to happen, I see a lot of people looking at other people who they perceived as having made it in the art world and sort of developing a style that's similar so that they can then hope to make it as well. But to me, you're almost painting yourself into a corner when you do that, because it's like, I would hope that young people start to develop their own voices and to look at the world around them and to trust that they have something to say on their own without having to say it the way somebody else already said it, you know? That's what I think about sometimes when I want students to really think seriously about why they're doing what they're doing. Why are you an artist? What do you have to say personally?
That's great advice. I think even for non-artists. Well, Renee, this has been definitely the high point of my week. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And I'm seeing all sorts of comments in the chat here that people have really enjoyed this and found it inspiring. So we appreciate you giving of your time like this. And feel free to talk to us anytime. We always love, yeah.
And I'm so glad that you all like the piece and it's always out and all that kind of thing. It's good to know that. And that's one of my favorites. So.
And I promise we will make sure that it is better documented in your archive as well as ours.
Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for coming. Yeah,
thank you,
everybody. I hope everyone has
everybody.
a great weekend.